Okay, let's get started. So, my name is Tom Gibo. I am with the Office Interoperability team. A lot of you guys already know me, but a couple of you may not. I'm going to be talking about Microsoft Teams and specifically the developer extensibility points or extension points within Teams. Just before we get started, running a little bit late, and I had like a really full hour of stuff to go over. So if I skip over a couple sections, just come see me afterwards, or I'd be happy to set up a session or something later in a breakout, like in a conference room or something. I'd love to talk to you guys about some of these, but I may have to skip and move a little bit fast. Okay. So here's the agenda. Sorry, the text is a little small on the side there. Um, so how many of you know what Teams is? Okay, so some of you actually don't. Okay, so good. We'll do a little bit, just a really quick overview, and we'll show you some of it. Then we'll talk about the extension points. So we're going to start with there are three main ones. In the coming up slides, I'll show you what those are, but here in the agenda, you'll see we're going to do tabs first. That's pretty much the main extension point from the user interface. It's where your app, your content, your services get into Teams and integrate with it. Then we'll talk about bots. Bots is also a super important part of Teams, and we'll talk about how that adds to the conversational part of your app and Teams and how they integrate. And then there is mention of connectors, but I'll explain why I'm not going to spend too much time on that. I will talk a little bit about that. Actionable messages, which ties in with both bots and connectors, activity feeds, compose extensions. So those last three are kind of like features of the extensibility story. And then throughout, you're going to see a little bit of the app package story, and that's the apps at the bottom there, and side loading. So you'll see a little bit of it, but at the end I'll kind of try to wrap it all up and show it to you again. So what is what is Teams? So it's a chat-based a hub for teamwork. It's basically a collaborative application where a team can kind of put everything together. It's based on Office 365 groups. And so what it does is it tries to put all the resources, or as many as it can, calendars, files, chat, messaging, everything that it can, plus extensibility apps like the ones that you guys will try to put together into one place. And that's where the Teams user interface comes in. Okay. Also, it's based on Office 365, so it uses the same kind of compliance and security and trust that you find in Office 365. Okay. So here you see the extension points. Basically, tabs, bots, and connectors are the main extension apps that can go into Teams, and then these four, the actionable messages, activity feeds, and compose extensions are actually kind of features within those, and they're used by the extension points. And the Office Store is we'll talk about that just briefly, how you can get your apps, your extensions built into Teams and visible in the Office Store so people can discover them. Okay, so we'll start with these, and we'll start with a little demo. Okay, and I forgot I need to put my glasses on so I can see my own screen up here. I have little ones. Okay, so we're going to do just a little demo to get you kind of oriented. Let's go. You guys can all see that? Okay, so this is Teams. So just a little bit of a tour here. We've got the activity feed. This is where notifications come for events that happen in Teams when somebody's added to a group or a team, when channels are added, renamed, all kinds of things. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Your chat interface, this is actually the kind of personal experience for chatting. So the user using Teams right now, that's me, chatting with bots and other people and things like that, but not in a team scenario. This is the Teams button, which shows you all the teams that you're currently a member of that have been added into Teams. I'm going to say a lot of redundant things like teams and channels and things like that. It's going to sound funny, but anyway, this is where you see your teams, and these here are channels. And channels are basically topical discussions, topical conversation points, and then furthermore we have meetings. So as I said, it's based on office groups, and that tries to put the resources for a team all together, kind of put them in a hub, including calendars. So your personal calendar in Office 365 and the team's calendar. And so events and appointments will show up here. Files, the files that are uploaded and linked to in conversations and in various things in things that the team are working on get uploaded to the Microsoft Teams file space, which is backing in SharePoint. That's here. And then OneDrive is also listed here. So you'll see my personal OneDrive files if you actually look here. And then we have an apps tab or an apps button, which shows you apps that are available to be added in. There are some featured apps, some recent ones that I've used. And you can also hit this Discover app flyout dialog, and this will show you apps from the store. So when you publish your own apps, they'll be discoverable here. Okay. And then, of course, my profile, and there's some settings here. And just a note about some of the features that we've got. The developer preview checkbox that you see down there makes available many of these extension features that I'm going to be talking about today. Okay. So that's a little bit of an overview. Let's go ahead and create a team just to kind of get things rolling here. And I'll use this throughout the talk. We'll call this the Redmond Plugfest team. Okay, you can put a description in here. Discussions about the Plugfest. Okay, and we can make it either private, meaning only owners can add members, or we can make it public. In this case, we'll just make it public. Okay. And immediately I can start adding people. So I'm going to add one of my teammates here, and he happens to be here. So I've added him. Close this, and now immediately Teams has spun up a team in Teams. And what I've got here is a canvas on which I've got several tabs. So I've got a conversation tab, I've got a files tab. Conversation tab is where we just have general conversations about topics. We've got and this is the general channel. As you can see, we've got one channel. We can add channels to it. We've also got a files tab where we can see all the files that have been referenced and uploaded. And then we've got a wiki. This is what you get by default. So what I'm going to be talking about is how do you add tabs. So right now what I'm going to be talking about how do you add these tabs in. And you'll see that if you hit that plus button, there's a number of tabs that are available both from Microsoft and third parties and that are available in the store. So right now what I want to do is just to demo this and kind of give you a feel for what it looks like when you add a tab. I want to add one called Polyscribe. This is you can see here by this little icon here that it supports tabs. So this app supports the tab extension point. That's all it supports right now. So it's a good one for me to use just to give you an idea. So I'm going to add this to the general channel in this team as a tab. This is its configuration page. It's got a little about box or a little about page. tells you something about the app. Okay. And then you can say, do you want to post to the channel that you've added this tab? That way other team members will find out and see that you've added this tab and they can make use of it. So we'll go save. And now what we have is the Polyscribe web app. This is the canvas for Polyscribe, and the initial UI that it displays is really just a way to authenticate me now. Then it's going to display some of its other UI. So let's go ahead and authenticate. And you can't see it because it's over on my other screen. There it is. So I'm going to go ahead and put in my password for my Tom Gibo user. Now that it's authenticated me with Office 365, which is great because now it has access to all my resources, it now shows me its main canvas. And it's a pretty simple one. It's one that allows you to do meeting minutes and notes and things like that. So I'll just create a meeting here. And you can see that I can name this. We'll call this our, project status meeting. And we could put agenda items in here, get status, round table, and then various things. I can give action items. Tom needs to update his profile, maybe resume. Okay, so a few things we can add. So basically, this is a simple kind of app, but it gives it shows you that you can add some powerful functionality into Teams for the team to use without really doing anything too sophisticated. And all this is a web app. So now that we've seen, there's a lot more to show you, but now that we've seen basically what these tabs look like, let's go back. And continue on, and we'll explore what tabs are. Okay. So in starting out thinking about a tab that you want to add, there's a few things that you need to think about. One thing is relevance, which means channel that I added this tab into in the demo that I just did is specific to a topic. Channels are very topical, and the team wants to talk about specific topics there. So when thinking about your tab and designing it, make sure that you design it in a way that it can be topical and relevant to that particular subject matter. There are static tabs and configurable tabs. I'll talk about that on the next slide. Static tabs would be something you want to consider designing. This is for the personal experience, so these wouldn't show up in channels. These would show up only in the personal interface with the user of that particular instance of the application of Teams. Scoping, making sense out of the scope boundaries for your app. Say you're a repository, a bug database or repository, and you want that to be brought into the Teams environment. You may want to scope that for the project and or the topic, so that not all of the bugs or all of the different projects are seen by that particular tab. So that's another typical thing that you'll want to do is scoping. Access, office groups, it's based on office groups, so access to those resources would be there if they're signed in with Office 365. So that can be very streamlined, but think about other access they might need. Say you're going to a third-party service or something. So that's another consideration. We'll talk about how to authenticate and that kind of stuff later. And then bots. So now we're tying into the next topic, but tab is really just the canvas you have for your app that the user sees, but really Teams is conversational. So you want to consider building a bot because a lot of things happen conversationally in Teams. Okay. Other considerations. So as I said, there are configurable and static tabs. Configurable are required, and they are the tabs that are for the channel and the team use. So the one I just did, you'll see that. Static tabs are the personal experience. So depending on what you want, you can have both or either or of those. Building a page for configuration. So there's provisions for supplying a URL to your tab's page, and I'm going to get into what that means. But for configuring the tab, so that's what we saw when we first added that tab. Polyscribe really didn't show us much. It didn't ask us anything. But in the sample that I'm going to load soon, it'll ask us some questions to configure that tab for this particular channel and the use of the team. And then reconfiguration, so the ability for the user to actually say, I need to edit the settings for this tab and change the configuration, and then removing the tab. So you need to provide all of these things. This is all part of the design of your tab. So the tab is really just a web app. So it's HTML based and hosted on some web server somewhere. And the manifest, which is based on JSON, very simple, easy to read, has URLs pointing to these hosted web apps. So it's really fairly straightforward if you're familiar with doing add-ins. It's very, very similar, although the manifest isn't XML, it's JSON. But it's very straightforward. And then when you put your app together in a package, and we'll kind of see this as we go through the story, it's really just a zip file with the manifest and a couple of icons. And that package, the icons are actually optional for doing development and testing, but they're needed for when you submit it to the store. And they'll be displayed alongside your information about your company and your app when it's displayed in the discovery dialog. So pretty straightforward stuff. Some of the base requirements, pretty simple, just that it needs to use secure HTTP, just like add-ins do. Allow iframes, so it needs to be able to run in an iframe, and that's pretty much the way add-ins are. It uses the Microsoft Teams API, so it needs the JavaScript script included in the web app, in the web code. And then initially, just the base requirement is it's going to call the Microsoft Teams initialize API. And that's it. And then pretty much after that, you could do nothing or anything or whatever you want. There are other APIs that you can call, and we'll take a look at those. So at this point, I'm going to load in another sample. So let's take a look. So here we are in Teams again. Let's create another channel, just because I didn't do that yet. So we'll call this project testing. So this is discuss testing plans and execution. Just kind of fictional project I have here. Okay, so again, we have another channel that we've created, our project testing channel. I want to bring in a sample at this point that I can show you all the code for, and we can take a look at what it's gonna do, and it'll be a very good instructional piece of code. So if I go to only if you add them. So there's no one in there now in that one. Yeah, in the general one there was. Yep. So I'm going to, you don't see it right now, but now you do. Go to GitHub, and on Office Dev Project in GitHub, there is a Microsoft Teams sample called Get Started. And this is actually a very full, it's a kind of a mock-up of a full application. It's got all the extension points in it. It does everything, but it only kind of fakes everything. So, but it's a great skeleton, basically, of the full thing, kind of like some of the other, like the WAPI sample that we use and some of the other ones. So you've got everything you need there, the scaffolding, and then you can plug it in. So we're going to use this to take a look at what the different parts are. So we can pull this in now. I've downloaded this, and I've got it in VS Code. Everybody can read that. Is it big enough? Everything should be big enough. And you have monitors back there. So this is what you get. This is actually, it comes in two flavors, this sample. It comes in C# and Node.js. And so I'm looking at the Node.js one. I'm wanting to kind of use JavaScript as my backend. So I'm going to look at this one. It comes with a bunch of different folders here containing the different features and extension points. So you see we have the tabs one here, and this is where the tabs code is. We have a bot, we have a compose extension, a connector, notifications. So there's a lot going on here. There's even authentication examples and notifications, separate manifests for those. These zip files here, so what the sample has done is it's given us the manifest with working URLs. So you don't actually have to build this and host it somewhere to see it run. So you can modify it and host it, and then submit it yourself or sideload it yourself. But they've given us working manifests. So if we take a look at these, this bot is the base one. They call it bot because it has a bot, but it has everything else too. It has tabs and everything. You'll see the manifest here. And there's some basic information in a manifest, the manifest version, the version of the app, the ID for it, when you register it, the package name, and the developer information, and then the name of the bot or the name of the app, and a number of other things. Here are the two icons we were talking about for the store. But we see here we've got static tabs and configurable tabs. So this is where the two different kinds of tabs are defined, and this sample contains the kind of working example of both. So the configurable tab, it would be the one that we just added. Okay, so let's go ahead and pull that into Teams. Okay, and we're in our channel. So let's go ahead and pull it in. So in this new team, I don't have it. So what I'm going to do is view the team. And in the preview, we have this app tab. I'm going to do sideload. And then the zip file contains the manifest. This is what the sideloading requires, is a zip file. And I'm going to pull it in. Okay. On the GitHub, there's a full README that gives you instructions on how to do everything. Yeah, so all the stuff that I'm doing, you'll find there. Yeah, you'll be able to find out how to do it. And there's even ones of how to do some of the testing for the connectors and stuff, which I'll show later. Yeah. So here we see that it is an app that's been added alongside Polyscribe. These are two apps that have been added to this team. And if I go back to here, I can add this in. Here's the sample app that was added. Now what we're going to see is the configuration dialog that comes up. Okay, so I want to name the tab. We're going to talk about tasks here. Tasks, project, or oh no. So the C# is we're talking about the back end code. So this is all running on the web servers. The C# is just a C# version of the hosted web app code. But what's running in Teams is the rendered HTML. It's all the rendered stuff from the hosted web app. So it doesn't matter what you run on the back end. Doesn't matter. Node.js, C#, whatever, Python, whatever's running back there. Yep. So what we're seeing in Teams is just the rendered stuff. So I'll leave all these the same. This is a configuration. We'll go ahead and spin it up. And it's a task app. So this sample is showing us some tasks, to-do list kind of tasks. It's a very simple UI. It really doesn't do much. I can select the tasks, but this is what I have. So let's go back. Now that we've loaded this in, let's go back to the code and just take a quick look at where all this stuff is. So the configure was in here. This is the HTML that got called for the configuration. And you can see here are the questions that it asks. So the code's all right there. You know, how many days for the tracking and what do you want to call it and everything. And then there's a bunch of script in here that sets up the tab. Basically, it sets it creates the settings for the configuration and sets up the tab. So before I get into the details of this, I'll go back to the slide and we will continue on because I'm going to talk about how that all works. So that configuration page is represented here in this kind of simplistic diagram as the config URL. So it's pointed to by the config URL, and there's the page. And during that process, once the user has clicked and filled in, all the configurations that are needed, the JavaScript code in that page will flag using set validity state that it's okay to save. So the user can then hit the save button. Once that's done, either before or after the save button is hit, there's a way to asynchronously do it after the save button is hit if there's more processing or there's something asynchronous that needs to be done. Then the settings can be saved, and the settings basically just configure within Teams the settings for that tab, the name of it, the ID, and the website URL, and a number of other things. So once that's all done, the tab is then loaded into Teams, and then we're ready to do other things. There's also auth considerations you might need to know about. If you're using existing Azure AD token because we're logged into an Office 365 tenant, then a lot of the authentication that you're doing can be done silently using the authentication method within the Teams API. If not, and a required pop-up is needed, then to get to some resource the tab is using, then the authenticate method within the Teams API will pop up the dialog and ask for a login. And then, of course, asynchronously, the result comes back and you can handle success and failure. Also, so auth is something the tab will need to do to get itself set up and ready. Deep linking is something the tab needs to know how to do. This is something within Teams is very important for people to kind of navigate around as messages are passed around, as tabs are used, as bots are being talked to and conversed with. We refer to items and we refer to things that are in various like OneNote files or OneNote sections or maybe a task in the sample we just loaded. And we need to refer to those and allow the user to be able to quickly jump between them, and that's what deep links do. So deep links are just URLs that contain a number of components that quickly get us to the specific piece of the specific part of the tab. Okay. And here's a kind of a blowout of what an example of a deep link looks like. So it contains an app ID for the app that serves that particular page or item. It contains the entity URL. This was the one that was registered when we registered the app and the tab. And then some context. So we've got a number of things in the context, the channel ID, where it was mentioned and that kind of thing. Okay. So deep links are used kind of all throughout Teams. Okay. Just to kind of wrap up tabs, I know that this was kind of sketchy, but basically these are the main highlights of things you need to know. Here are the APIs that you'll most likely be using, at least at the base level. So the base Microsoft Teams namespace has the initialize API that kind of gets everything going within your script before you can start really making use of the context in Teams. Get context will get the context for referencing various items in the API in the model, and then share deep link is the one I just mentioned. That will pop up the dialog and let the user actually copy this URL for the deep link that you create in your bot or in your tab or something when cross-referencing within Teams. Settings, this is where you save, you can save additional settings or where you are required to save the settings for the tab when you configure it. And then the authentication, which I just showed you. So it's just kind of a review of the APIs, the main APIs and a few others that you'll need in tabs. And the documentation for these is all online on dev.office.com. Okay, so bots. So bots are give your app and all the apps within Teams the conversational nature. So they allow both one-on-one interaction and team conversations, and they interact within Teams, within conversations and within the one-on-one context. If you've ever built a bot, and there's actually a session, I think it's after this one today, I'm pretty sure, on the bot framework and Lewis, the language services. You'll find out in that one how to put together a bot of your own, and it's actually not that hard to build a bot, and they're really pretty cool. So there's a bot framework, there's an SDK. You can quickly spin up some code and then register your bot, and then your bot is then talking to a backend service Microsoft provides, which is a bot connector service, and that allows it to talk to various different applications like Teams and Skype and some other ones like that. So it's very easy to build your bot, get it connected, and get it talking to users in these different contexts. Okay. So bots will pass around things like these cards. We'll see this more later as we get going. The cards are rich cards. They're basically actionable. That you can click. You can make selections and click on them. Do things like these polls, which I'll show you just shortly. And I'll show that to you now, actually. Okay. So I'm going to show you polyfill. So I'm going to pull polyfill into, if I can, oops, put it here, to here, and polyfill is this guy right here. This is a polling application. It supports a tab. It also supports a bot. So this is why we're going to look at this now. So we'll pull this in. We'll add it. It doesn't do any configuration. It's just got this configuration page which just says this is who I am and this is how you use me, kind of. It's got an about page. So we'll save it. And this is the polyfill tab canvas. So this is what it shows you. So there's really no interaction here. This one, this is an app that doesn't really do any UI interaction in the tab. Okay. I can click on stuff, but nothing happens. So what it's really doing is just showing me stats. This is just a report. So how do I interact with this? Well, let's go back to, now that I've got this app in here, let's go back to our conversation tab and hit the @ and then start typing poly, and look, there's a bot. So now I have a bot and I can say, you know, like hello. When I say hello to Polly, he'll say hi. I can also say nothing, and he gives me some help. So the bot knows enough to, I didn't know what to say, so it gave me some help on how to create a poll. So let's create a little poll here. And I think I did add a team member here, so my team member will also see this. Polly, what's for breakfast? So this is the name of the poll. And then we'll do eggs, waffles, or just fruit. Okay. So Polly should come back. If it didn't, then I need to do that again. That's why I didn't resolve the name. Now Polly should come back and created a poll for me. And it put the poll in the form of a card, an actionable card, as a matter of fact. And already one of the other team members, who the only one I had, Will, is on my team. So he's already voted. So now we see that actionable card was updated dynamically. That's part of the whole actionable cards and messages feature that we'll talk about a little bit later, if we have time. So I can now click on this and show you basically what he did, and I want waffles. Okay, so now we've got a poll with some votes on it. If we go back to the Polly tab, Polly has updated the stats, and so it's just a kind of read-only display of what's going on here. So great. So that's what Polly does. Let's get back into our talk here and see how some of this stuff works. Okay, so just to kind of step back a little bit, you'll learn a lot about bots later, but just to kind of give a brief overview, decide, when you're designing your bot, decide how intelligent and everything you want it to be. It can be just a command line interface if that's really what you need for your app, or it can be a little more intelligent, but you're not trying to pass a Turing test. So that's a key thing, and you'll find that out when we talk about the bot framework, and you'll find out a lot more detail about what that means, how you do that. Be responsive, so not just in the sense of be quick and respond to things quickly, but respond to every message. A bot that ignores things, which it looked like it did before, but I didn't address it properly. A bot that ignores things is seen as maybe not fully implemented, and so it's important to respond to every message, and then say hello, meaning respond to events as well. And so we'll have a couple slides on events and what that means. Things like when users are added, channel names or chain channels are added. There's a number of events that bots will listen for. And they can listen for. And then if they see something interesting, they can actually post a message to any number of things, either, whole roster of team members, or an individual team member, or, the team conversation page itself, and just say, hey, I saw this happen, maybe you need to do this, or I'm here to help, kind of thing. Okay, so again, the bot framework is the place to get started with your bot to get the code going. Here are the URLs to do this. Basically, you can use the SDK to get the code, the basic starter code for this, and to get it registered and with that URL right there, providing information about your bot, getting an app ID, and a client secret, and a number of other things. There's a number of steps to do this, and then to host your bot. So there's a bunch of steps. One thing that's really great is this Azure bot service. Okay, the Azure bot service makes all of that really, really simple. And so in about 4 steps versus maybe 10 or 20 or something, you can go to this in your portal, or go in your portal. This is the actual documentation that gives you the steps to do it. You can go into your Azure portal, just hit a few clicks, and all of a sudden you've got your bot running in Azure, hosted, able to be tested. It's got a testing framework there to actually work with it. You can do continuous integration, set that up with it, download the code. It's everything is just right there, and so it's a really great resource to use that and get you up running quickly. And as we just talked about earlier, the bot framework, just like in tabs, has C# libraries to interface with teams. It also interfaces with JavaScript libraries. So you would require the bot builder, and in C# you've got these connector teams library or namespace. So the other thing is, if you are not using a language, so Eitan mentioned those two, but actually if you're not using one of these, you can really use any language you want, because you can use any language that will call REST APIs. So you can conceivably build your bot using the REST APIs directly. Okay, and bots can work in, as I mentioned before, team versus personal scope, and this is in the manifest. And I'll kind of try to wrap it up at the end by showing all of these things. But that defines where the bot will interact and converse. Okay, so now what I want to do is show the bot for the sample that we're working with, just quickly. Go into here, and so we have our tasks, but we can interact with the bot here, and there's our sample, and the sample gives us some help. So we can say create. This is a task app, so the bot in this case helps us to create a task, and Tom needs to update his resume. So now we've got a task that's been created for me to do something, and it's also an actionable message. So the bot was very good. It came up with an actionable message to assign the task, name it, or view it, view the task itself, or view it in a list. And so here the view task is going to use a deep link. So if I do this, if I click this, it's going to, oh, sorry. So this actually takes, my mistake here. This actually views the task in the sample app. This isn't the deep link. But I can click the assign to me, and you'll see that it used the in-place update, the card update feature for the bot. So just quickly, let's take a look at the code. And this is the manifest that we've already seen. And then down in the bot code here, you'll see that a bot is really just a REST listener. It's a kind of a REST endpoint listener. You've got start listening on the API bot URL endpoint. And then it looks for a number of things. It's going to look in the text. This is a simple, just a simple bot looking at messages coming in. And I'll show the architecture for how those come in, but it's just looking for the text, and it's looking for things like create and assign and that kind of thing. So back to the slides. So how does this all work? This looks very complicated, but it's really not that bad. So your bot code is running over there on the left-hand side with the Bot Builder SDK. That's the code we were just looking at, hosted on a web server. It's going to be interfacing with back-end services. So it's going to, like in this case, the task app. It's going to be going to some database, presumably, and picking out things that it needs to supply users here. It's then going to go through, when it makes a call like send, it's going to go through the connector service, the bot connector service. That connector service hooks it up with various channels. These channels are not exactly the channels in Teams, but these are the connector service channels which hook you up with these applications. Okay? And in the case of Teams, when you build your bot, you'll connect it with the Microsoft Teams channel. And all messages that come in to the bot will have that as the channel ID, has MS Teams as a channel ID. So here's what it looks like when you get a message in a bot. So in that REST endpoint, when it's listening, everything is an activity object. It's a JSON object that's called an activity object. And it's got a number of properties that tell it what kind of activity it was, what was the text that was sent, if it was a message. In this case, these are message type objects. The channel ID will always be MS Teams when it's in Teams. Your bot can also interface with other Skype and other applications, in which case the channel ID will be something else. So you can repurpose your bot code. And then it's got tenant IDs for like the Azure AD, so you know how to get to the Azure AD when calling the Teams APIs to do things like authenticating and getting information about the user and the group. And a number of other things, and you probably can't read over on the left, but basically you can see the general form. It's just a JSON object. So bots can create conversations or respond to them. So here we just see just quickly the begin dialogue, create conversation. Those are for JavaScript and C#, and then the REST endpoints for creating conversations. And I'm kind of moving a little more quickly now. And this is an example of what it looks like in the request and the response. What comes back in the response is an ID that the bot needs to save and use for that whole conversation when it creates one. So yeah, and it can target a specific member or a group. Okay, and then there's the ID of the conversation. Okay, basics, sending a reply, sending and replying to messages, and then the REST endpoints for that. Okay. And an example of sending a reply or replying with an at mention. So we have like I was doing with the bots, I did the at mention to specifically target one user, which happened to be the bot in this case. And in this case, you see what that looks like in the entities section of the reply. He's actually at mentioning, this bot is actually at mentioning one of the users. Okay. And the message update. So when we saw that the card that was sent was updated because I hit a sign or the poll got updated, this is how it's done, just simply modifying, using the same activity ID that the message came in with or that the message was first sent out with, and then using the connector update function to send the modified card back out, and then it just updates in place. So that's basically how that's done. Not too, shocking. Okay. And then events are really important. So as I had mentioned before, bots can and should probably respond to events. When a new member is added to the team, the bot might want to address that new member and say, hey, I'm here to help, or I'm here to create a new issue for you on our repository or whatever it is, or find a file for you or whatever. So the events are listed here. Conversation updates, there are different kinds of general types: conversation updates, contact relation updates, user delete user data, and then these are the event types: members added, removed, and channels renamed, deleted, that kind of thing. So these are the kind of things that bots can listen for and respond to. And then the card, this is just kind of an overview of sending cards and the different kinds of the different types of data that are sent for the different parts of the card. So the card is really a JSON object again, and it has different fields with title, subtitle text, images, things like that. Tap is actually a field that will allow the user to click on the whole card, and it'll take it to an item or something directly within the tabs, the app. Okay. So at this point, we're getting pretty much towards the end. I'm probably can go a few minutes, but I'm going to move quickly. So I think what I'll do is skip over notifications, and so actually notifications is next, so I'll just do actionable messages here. So connectors and actionable messages. So we have a talk on this coming up later today, and David Clough is going to be talking about that, and he'll go into a lot of how connectors work, how they work in Outlook. The same connectors will work the same way in Teams. So you can build a connector for Outlook or for Office and plug it right into Teams, and it'll work. They use rich cards, just like the bot was sending around, with actions that can be taken on the external service. Okay. And this is what it looks like to install a connector. And you just go to the general, or to the tab that you want, and install your connector. There is an example code. There is sample code, and I can show you really quickly how you would test that. So if we go to, yes, I know I'm running out of time, Will. So if we go here, and we go into our channel, and we say connectors. So the sample app is already a connector, and it's already been loaded in, side-loaded with all of the other extension points. So we have the connector running. The sample app connector is running somewhere in a web site. So to test it, though, we want to kick it. We want to allow it to say, oh, something external happened, and send us an update, send us a message that happened. So you have to kind of do that from the outside. But connectors use webhooks. And so in order for the connector to know where to send that, it wants to send it to the MS Teams webhook. And so the way you would get that webhook URL is through this webhook connector. It's another connector. So we can just install this connector, and when we do, we're actually configuring it. And we'll call this project updates, and hit create here. You can change the icon if you want. And once it's configured, you get the webhook URL. Then you can take that, and this is all documented on the GitHub of how you test the connector for this sample app. For the sample app, they've got this connector URL that you see up here. So this is the endpoint for the connector URL, or for the connector service that's running out there for the sample app. All we have to do is point it to the webhook, which we just got from the webhook connector, and then in a browser, and then hit enter. Let it navigate there. If we come back here, clear this, we'll see that we now have a task from the sample app connector that's been sent to us as if that task had been changed. This is kind of randomly generated to demonstrate this, to simulate what's happening. So this is a connector card sent by the sample app connector service. It is a rich card with actionable items and everything. You can, add a comment, and it will update, and it has text fields and whatnot. So this is how this works, and the code for that is under the connector here. And you'll see this is the register, this is the send, and you'll see that eventually here what it'll do is it'll call generate card, somewhere in here. It calls generate card, which is in our utils right here, generate connector card. And you'll see there's a number of items in this particular card that show up, and this card is just the JSON. Okay, so this is just a descriptor for the card, and you'll see it's got sections, it's got some actions, it's got the the items and then some actions here. These actions actually point to URLs. They're not filled in here for these ones, but and those are how the actions get triggered. Okay, so one more thing, and then I'll let you guys go. Okay. Okay, so I won't go through how the connectors work because we're running out of time. And then the activity feed, just to mention that activity feed is the way that your app can notify the individual user using Teams at the time of things that have happened. So if somebody gets added to a team, or if something, some event happens, a notification can be sent in the form of one of these cards to the activity feed, and that was the thing at the very top up there, the top of the left, and that's kind of like an action center. So this is done via bots, using the same API that the bots use, sending messages, same cards, everything. So typically what might be done is a bot would be created that would be a notification only bot. There's in the manifest JSON, there's a flag for this that says is notification only. If that's true, that means this bot's whole purpose in life is just to send notifications and listen for things that need to be notified. So that's kind of a new form of the bot. Okay, so I'm not going to demo that. Compose extensions are really cool. So I just wanted to say a few words about this. So a Compose extension, again, is another bot, but this gives you the ability to write a query processor. Okay, so basically a query processor that will go and look up items in your app, find things that from your backend service, whether it be bugs in a database or tasks in the task app or whatever, polls or whatever. Find them, give the user a selection of them, and then when the user selects, that can go into the compose bar along with text and app mentions and other things to be then posted to the conversation. Typical thing would be like the emoji one that we see in Teams right now. But what I'll do is just demo really quickly the compose for the sample app. And if I choose here the ellipsis, now I can do a search. And I chose the sample app. I can do a search and say, find, Tom's, whatever. And actually it gives me a list of the possible tasks that meet that criteria. In this case, it's random because it's a sample and it's simulating. So I'll pick one of these. Notice how that gets stuffed into, that card gets stuffed into the compose box. I can add some text along with it. I can mention, Will, say, here's the one we were talking about. And now Will gets mentioned and it goes into the conversation, and here's the card. So compose extensions are part of your bot. You just repurpose part of your bot to do a search. So how that works is the compose extension, the bot gets a message with the invoke type and a search command and some query parameters, and then it basically does the backend query and sends back a response that's a compose extension object that has a number of things in it that allow it to fill out this list. And before I show you what's in the compose extension object, Compose extension design configurations are to optimize the search results. Make sure that you don't do long-running searches because we're all inside a compose box waiting to do a message here. Optimize the cards, make them useful and attractive for this purpose. And then here's the request. So the request comes into the bot as a message type invoke with the compose extension / query, and then some command, which would in this case would be the search command, followed by some parameters and anything else. So it could have @messages, it could have or @mentions or messages in it. And what it responds with is the compose extension object, including the type result. Attachment layout can be list or grid, so it can be a list or a grid of images and things, and then the actual array of attachments, which are going to be these cards associated with the items. So it's like a kind of like a dictionary that gets sent back. Currently, they support, all of Teams supports messages that are thumbnail type, hero, or Office 365 connector cards. These are just different kinds of cards, but Teams is working to expand that to provide a whole host of other card types. Okay. This is just a note about doing authentication. If the query comes into the bot and finds that the user who's done the query, who's doing the query, needs to be authenticated, it can actually return from the query with a logon request. Teams will then pop up a logon dialog, and the logon dialog will then authenticate the user, and then what comes back is a code. Well, when the logon request went back from the bot, there was a code. Then Teams, once the user's authenticated, Teams will send back another query with the code, so then the bot knows, okay, this user's been authenticated, now I can go ahead and do the query. Okay, and I think we're kind of running low on time, so I will wrap it up here. Again, I will be available to go into much more detail if you guys want to. I'd love to talk to you guys about this. Any of these points that you want to talk about, or all of them, just come to me and I'll definitely sit down with you. We can go through the code, etc. So submitting your app is fairly straightforward. The Teams app, just quickly bring this up in code and show you I told you I would just do the overview. So here, if we look at the manifest again, you'll see that not only do we have the header information, we have the tabs, we also have the bot section in here, which registers the bot, including its ID, its scopes, team or personal, its command list, what it can do, in this case, create, find, help, link, all of that. Connector is in here. So the connectors are registered with Office 365 as connectors. That was the one that I saw that I showed you with the webhook. The Compose extension is also registered here as a separate bot. So, and that shows the search command. And then a couple of other things. So this shows you that the package, you can put all of this stuff together or piecemeal one at a time and sideload them and or then submit them to the store as one whole package. Tabs, bots, connectors, and then all those features that I showed you. Okay. And then finally, okay, so to get started with the store, create your developer account first, Office developer account. Go to dev.office.com to do that. Register in the seller dashboard. So this is where add-ins get submitted. This is also where your Teams app gets submitted. And here's the URL for how to do the Teams submission. And that's just our summary. And there's the submission URL again, and some resources for you. So if you have suggestions, email to Microsoft Teams Dev at Microsoft.com, and Stack Overflow if you have problems, need help working through something. All right. Thank you.